Do you see the scar right here? If you thought that my mother died to save me and that's how I got it, if you thought that in the process of dying to save me she vanquished a noseless albino, you would be wrong. This is actually a much more recent acquisition than a childhood scar. I was laying in bed, as I do every night before I go to sleep and after I wake up. But I had just woken up, but I wasn't quite with it yet. And I think I had rolled over onto my side and I was laying on my shoulder, and when you lay like right here, it numbs your entire arm, and so my entire arm was numbed, and somehow I clawed myself and my forehead started bleeding. I'm not really sure how it happened. That's a lie. I know how it happened, but I don't know why. Why? Maybe it was something subconscious. I actually do like to numb my hand. I like to sit on it until I can't feel it and then stroke my face with it, and it feels so uncanny, like a lover's caress, but in a pleasant way. And so maybe it was something subconscious going on. Violence. But I was so worried when I got in the shower that let me listen, pause. I take a lot of showers. I love a shower. A shower is my reset. I take probably at least 2 showers a day, probably 3. When it's hot out, 3. Midday, morning, and evening. Not because I care about cleanliness, but because I like how it feels. I guess I like how cleanliness feels, but I don't mind a dirty broad. Listen, I don't mind a dirty broad. But I got so worried that the water would keep touching the scar that I went to Target, got a bunch of waterproof band-aids so I could slap them on my forehead when I got in the shower, and then I left them in my car and I haven't used them since. And that was 3 days ago, and my scar is looking just fine. Which I'm grateful for, because sometimes when I was a kid, I think I might have picked a scab one too many times, and now there's a scar. Although it looks cool, I guess. Thankfully, it looks like my face is healing just fine. I got a pimple, zit, cyst, whatever you want to call it, a couple years ago, and it was like right here on my face. And I picked it or popped it or whatever one too many times, and it stayed there for a second, and I was like, holy hell, I'm gonna have this on my face for the rest of my life. And I had accepted a life of eternal scarring with a volcano on my face, and then it went away, of course, but I cannot help myself. When a little scar appears, I really think it's there for life. Sometimes when the skin grows over a scab too much, if you pick it too much, the skin gets confused and I think it grows over, and for that reason I keep a pair of box cutters on hand and I'll just slice it off, and it bleeds for a second, but it's fine in the end. But luckily, I didn't need a box cutter for my head, and I don't think it will leave a lasting mark. Unlike the books we're talking about in today's video, for the most part, they're just very good books I've been reading recently. I'm including 2 books that I didn't think were fantastic. We're talking about 6 books I've just been reading. Some books I didn't finish, some books I did. I don't really know how to break these videos up, so I'm just breaking them up. However, but there are 4 books that I thought were really amazing, and most of these I had no hope for. Absolutely no hope for. The last 2 were just books that I finished, and I'm throwing in here for the sake of talking about them because I don't have a Goodreads, don't have a Storygraph, don't have anything but a super successful YouTube channel. And so I'm just talking about them. I mean, they had some merit, they were interesting. But the main theme, and we'll talk about these books first, is books that really kind of blew me away, that were really, really great. I'm always surprised. I was going to say that I read, which I get to a point when I'm reading a book and I'm like, why do I read? Am I posturing? Am I pretending to be smart? Do I think it makes me better? And the answer is probably maybe some of that, but the real reason, as these books reminded me, is that because I actually like to read. I like a good story. A lot of these books, or at least a few of them, are very popular books, and for a medium, that medium being books, for a medium that is supposedly centered around storytelling, it's surprising how often people dismiss a book as having little substance, that it's just a good story and that's that. These are all very, very great stories. Anyway, the point of that was that if I cared enough about what other people read and other people's opinions on books and reading, which I don't. Read whatever you want, listen, read whatever you want, do whatever you want, think whatever you want. But it sometimes really bamboozles me that people, they dismiss these extremely popular books. I guess taking that idea to its logical conclusion would be like a Sarajemus, A Court of Thorns and Roses. That book is entertaining, it has a story, and people dismiss it as just trash, TikTok, whatever. And the gag is that good storytelling, a good book makes. The point is that really, really popular books are great, and that storytelling should be the #1 criteria when examining a book. I don't care about the author's intent, I don't care about the social message. Irrelevant. All irrelevant. All but irrelevant. It's storytelling. It's storytelling. It's storytelling. Anyway, we're talking about good stories. I have been dreading making this video because when I read a good book, I feel like I have absolutely nothing to say, particularly when I think it's flawless. It's just like, oh, here is a bunch of good quotes, and it's me being cyclical, saying the same thing over and over. It's wonderful, it's great, it's fantabulous, it's whatever. But I'm gonna give it my all. I also feel like I don't remember anything about these books, but I keep a notes app for each of them, so we'll probably just end up heavily referring to that. Now that we've got a solid 10-minute intro out of the way, let's get into the books, starting with Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. The first Ann Patchett book I read was The Dutch House, and I thought it was amazing. It is amazing. Very sad, very wonderful, great storytelling. And then I read Commonwealth and I thought it was trash and annoying. And I think what I've realized about Patchett is that she's not doing the same thing over and over again. That it's more that her stories aren't the same thing over and over again, which is fine. I recently saw a Sally Rooney article where they were like, what do you feel? It was some New York Times article where they were like, Sally Rooney doesn't care about career growth. I hate the New York Times, and I hate the, pandering to excitement, which is, I guess, the whole job of a news outlet, but I don't care. I don't like it. And I don't like the New York Times, but that's a story for another time. Maybe sooner than you think. But they had an article where they were talking about Sally Rooney. It was for her new book, Intermezzo, which I am itching to read, but I don't want to read it and not like it and then tromp on people's party. But the interviewer asks her, how do you think your novels will change? People say that your characters can be taken from one book and placed into any of your other books. And she goes, well, yeah, but they're different, or something like that. And then she doubles back and she goes, actually, her first thing felt kind of cop-out-y. It was like, whatever. But then she goes, actually, the best writers, she doesn't say the best writers, or maybe she does. She says her influences, Jane Austen, Dostoevsky, Henry James, and maybe one other person, they write novels where the characters could be picked up and dropped into any other one of the novels. And I really agreed with that. The best writers do not change. The best writers don't have to change. What do you need growth for when you're already a great storyteller with people who really enjoy your books? Which is not to say that that's the criteria for a good book, but just that you're producing books that you like, and as a bonus, other people enjoy them too. There's no need to change in major ways. You know what I'm saying? No need to innovate. No need to reinvent the wheel. You're doing the same thing, but it's enjoyable and it's its own story. That's how I feel about Bret Easton Ellis. In fact, his books, that idea that his characters can be picked up and dropped into other one of his books is literally true, because I think a character is in each of the books. There are characters in the BEE universe that are literally in each of the other books. One of the books mentions Patrick Bateman in a different novel, the protagonist-ish of American Psycho. There's a bunch of overlap. Also, fun tidbit, The Rules of Attraction mentions Donna Tartt's The Secret History Kids. Pretty cool. The point in that was the half point, it was barely a point, that Ann Patchett is not quite like that for me. I think that the Dutch House had a different, I don't know, she's tweaking it. She tweaks her method per se. The humor in Commonwealth was just silly and stupid, and I thought it was bad, and I've talked about it at length. so I can't talk about it anymore. But I remember the Dutch House being pretty solemn, straight-cut storytelling and sad, per se. Not like her essay collection. What is it called? I don't know what it's called. But in that and in Commonwealth and in Tom Lake, she has a kind of cunty humor. Not in a necessarily negative way, but it's just cunty. You know what I'm saying? Like an aunt who's very stern, but is a rule breaker or something. What I'm saying is that each of Ann Patchett's books feels like its own journey. They're not the same. It feels like she's doing variations on herself as opposed to new versions of the same thing. After Commonwealth, I got rid of most of my Ann Patchett books, and I was not planning on picking up another Ann Patchett book for years, but my friend went to her bookstore in Tennessee. Ann Patchett has a bookstore, and she signs all her books, and my friend asked if I wanted it, and I said, sure. So she bought it for me, and it came with, the bookstore is called Parnassus, and it came with a postcard, Tom Lake. And so I got it expecting to not read it, at least for a few years, and then I saw it sitting on my shelf. And what I've been doing recently is a last-ditch effort to give a book a shot, is checking out the audiobook from my library and just listening to some of it and seeing if I like it. And that was the case with this, although it wasn't a last-ditch effort because I wasn't going to get rid of it because it's a signed copy that my friend got me. I just wasn't planning on reading it for a long time. But I did pick it up, and in the beginning I was like, okay, fun, cool, listened to the audiobook, read along, did a little bedtime story. It was nice, relaxing, didn't love it. Like I said, Ann Patchett herself and her characters that resemble her, those being middle-aged women per se, are cunty in a fun way. But I don't particularly love that sort of character. Meryl Streep did a wonderful reading of this book. If that's how you say her name, Meryl Streep. But it's great. And by the end, I really, really love this book, and I think I cried. This book is set during COVID, 2020, the months following the world shutting down. And that was another reason I didn't care to pick this book up, because I said, I don't care. I can't relive it. I don't want to. But COVID is explicitly mentioned maybe twice in this book, and she doesn't belabor the point at all. This is not a COVID novel. It just happens to have been written when COVID happened. I also don't like when an author brings the reality of a time period into their novel for no reason. And that's a theme for the next book as well. What I mainly mean is historical fiction, but we'll talk about that if I remember for the next book. But I don't like it because oftentimes it's very... I wonder if I've ever filmed a video where there wasn't a siren in the background. Anytime, listen to that. Anytime I film, someone is always getting mugged, beat up, put down, arsonized, robbed. I can't catch a break. There is crime everywhere. But I don't mind the COVID and in the next book, the historical fiction, because the situation in the book is necessitated by that historical period or event. In this case, 3 adult daughters in their early 20s return to the farm in Maryland? Somewhere in the Northeast, that they grew a cherry farm. Irrelevant. That they grew up on, I was going to say when they were kids, but that they grew up on. You tend to grow up when you are a kid. The 3 daughters are running the farm with their mother and father, and their mother is telling them a story about a super famous movie star who she used to date, and they didn't know that, and they're begging her for more information. And it starts off as a fun, silly romp that weaves the present of taking care of the farm during COVID, although it's not explicitly mentioned. At this point, I've probably said COVID more times than Ann Patchett mentions it in the book. But it weaves between the present and the past of the mother's relationship with this movie star unfolding. And it slowly and seamlessly evolves into a heart-wrenching story. There are very many plot twists. Very many. At least 3 major plot twists that I was like, oh, one thing about Ann Patchett is she is a masterful storyteller. Great writer, very readable, and plot twists to boot. I have absolutely no critiques. Tom Lake feels perfect to the point of AI generated. It's like it would be the end point of AI novelist writing, and that is not a dig. I mean AI positive connotation, an attitude shift from fun and silly daughters and mothers to life choices and where you end up is deft. As they say, it's wonderful. Apart from the very literal summary of it being about three daughters listening to their mother's story about her past love, it is also about the path in life we choose and why. In this case, why the mother, who was on track to become a super famous movie star, who starred in a movie and who everyone else said she was great, why she chooses to become a farmstress. It's about the choices we make in life, and that the glamorous path is actually probably rarely the most fulfilling. While I was waiting for noise to die down, I was reading the praise for Tom Lake on the back. Listen. They know what they're doing. Sometimes the blurbs are actually pretty silly, especially for books that aren't great and someone has to blurb them. But this blurb from Kirkus Reviews is great and is a summary of what I've been rambling about for the past whatever minutes. It says, Patchett's intricate and subtle thematic web enfolds the nature of storytelling, the evolving dynamics of a family, and the complex interaction between destiny and choice. These braided strands culminate in a denouement at once deeply sad and tenderly life-affirming. Amen. Amen. Keep that in mind for the next book, because I certainly won't. Maybe I will. I'm trying. The review finishes off poignant and reflective, cementing Patchett's stature as one of our finest novelists. The ending is all the more sad because of its life-affirmingness that is contrasted by the path another character takes. Let's look at my notes app and see what I had to say while I was reading the book, while I was actually reading it. Here are some notes. I have random tidbits. If you've read the book, if you haven't, Tom Lake is a place in the book where the mother acts in a play, and her love interest tells her a fake story about why it's called Tom's Lake, and they both started laughing about it. I didn't get why that was funny. I was like, what? Fun, silly, flirty, bantery was in one of my bullet points. She's pretty horny. This book is fairly horny. Definitely hornier than the other books that I remember reading from her. Other books being a non-fiction essay collection, and one other book in its entirety. I said it feels lab-grown. It's so perfectly crafted. Amen. Maybe that's a better diagnosis than the goal of AI writing. I've already recommended this book to my friend, and she said, I'm not really loving it in the beginning, and I wasn't either, but by the end, we were both enamored. It's a wonderful book. I said, books that give you a sense of the scope of life are sad. Amen. Good point. And that's what this book does. It kind of does the, not highlight reel, but a rerun of her relationship with a man starting when she's young and over the course of her life. And when that relationship ends, per se, when does anything end? You know what I'm saying? But ends, like, when they break up. It begins to focus more on her life and on her current husband and the kids and stuff. It's just sad. Books that give you a sense of the scope of life are sad, for me at least. I mean, there are things that are specifically sad about Tom Lake, but just its scope is what really is moving. I think that might often be because a sense of the scope of life, one of the essential elements of that is that there are paths that you could have taken that were once open to you but are no longer. Some quotes. I actually don't have many quotes. I'm sure that there were a few good ones. Here's one, page 3. I tried to decide if it was more depressing to see the people I knew or the people I didn't know. Cheryl, who worked the register at a major market and must have been my mother's age, was holding a resume and headshot in her mittened hands. If Cheryl had always wanted to be an actress, I didn't think I could ever go to the grocery store again. She's funny. Page 14. It wasn't that I wanted to be an actress. It was that I knew that I could do a better job. Amen. That's talking about how the mother gets into acting. It's not that she particularly wanted to, but she knew she could do a better job. Amen. Somewhere in chapter 18, I wrote down the quote, the rage dissipates along with the love, and all we're left with is a story. Amen. That pretty much sums up the book. But before we move on, I'll read a paragraph that I really enjoyed on page 116. It's a bit of a hefty paragraph. It says, quote, I mean, the kid who played George is gone, I say, but they don't understand what I'm talking about. Duke is as close as the cherries on the tree, as is Uncle Wallace, for reasons that are no doubt connected to how things ended. Lee I remember less as a person and more as a story, and George I do not remember at all. There was no explaining the simple truth about life. You will forget much of it. The painful things you were certain you'd never be able to let go, now you're not entirely sure when they happened, while the thrilling parts, the heart-stopping joys, splintered and scattered and became something else. Memories are then replaced by different joys and larger sorrows, and unbelievably, those things get knocked aside as well until one morning you're picking cherries with your 3 grown daughters and your husband goes by on the gator and you are positive that this is all you've ever wanted in the world. She's a wonderful writer. I don't know why I'm always surprised when a writer who I've professed to love on the basis of one book, why I'm always surprised when I read another book of theirs and it's amazing. I would really recommend Tom Lake, definitely if you've read Ann Patchett and like her, or if you just want a readable story about life and family and the choices, the irreversible choices we make. That's very moving in the end. The next book is Amor, Towles, The Rules of Civility, and I was about to get rid of this book when I was like, listen, let me check and see if the library has it, the audiobook for it, and I'll just listen to some of it, see what I think, whatever. Like I said, that's been my last-ditch effort at giving a novel a chance, especially by an author I haven't read yet. Just, sure, let's see what the hype is about. I thought I would hate this book. The only reason I bought this, or why his writing has been nagging me, I thought it would be trash. Listen, I thought this book would be trash, but the only reason I've had a nagging in the back of my mind for quite some time now is because a woman named Angela, whose book taste is very similar to mine per se. What I'm trying to say is that she has great taste. And she said, we were talking about books, and she said she loved A Gentleman in Moscow a couple years ago. And I was like, oh, really? I thought those books would be terrible. And she said, no, it was really, really wonderful. That combined with, it was really just that. But then also the books are extremely popular. They're very, very popular. And I'm always interested what the zeitgeist has a fetish for at the moment. So I didn't buy these books on Amazon, but I found them at thrift stores. I'm saying them because I bought A Gentleman in Moscow and The Rules of Civility, and I was like, whichever one I feel like picking up first, I'll pick up. Bought them at thrift stores, sat on my shelf forever. I was weeding my bookshelf and I was like, time to go, time to go, time to go. One of the main reasons I thought I would hate these books is because the marketing is horrendous. What an ugly cover. It looks like it would be some upturned nose, snooty, historical fiction. Self-indulgent, bad, poorly written, arrogant. And certainly there is a special brand of arrogance in writing historical fiction. There is, of course, arrogance in writing, period. But in historical fiction particularly, I find there to be an annoying arrogance in that it's like, oh, my story wasn't good enough for the present that I'm well versed in. I'm going to set it in the past. A time when I wasn't alive and kicking, presumably, unless you're writing it at like an obscene age. But you're setting it back in time and saying, yeah, I can handle it. I can give you an accurate picture, even though I wasn't there, I can do it. And also it seems oftentimes as a ploy for credibility that it being set in a past time period, that the lumps of decades upon the book, perceived lumps of decade, lend it credibility. For that reason, I hate historical fiction, and the irony is that a lot of the books that I've read recently have been historical fiction, and also not recently, but all books I thought I would hate. This, Atonement, and All the Light We Cannot See, and I loved all of these books so much. The summary of The Rules of Civility is terrible. I'm going to read it to you, not to give you any sense of what the idea is about, but so that you can process the trauma of a bad book summary and move on with your life and actually pick this book up and read it. It says, on the last night of 1937, 25-year-old Katie Content is in a second-rate Greenwich Village jazz bar when Tinker Gray, a handsome banker, happens to sit at the neighboring table. This chance encounter and its startling consequences propel her on a year-long journey toward the upper echelons of New York society, where she will have little to rely upon other than a bracing wit and her own brand of a cool nerve. What a terrible, terrible summary. Cringy writing style of the summary, and also it makes it seem like some sort of girl bossy historical fiction that is completely completely dry. It's really none of those things. It is entertaining pretty much from what I remember from the get-go up until the last page. It is, you want to know what's happening. I didn't talk about this with Tom Lake, or I forgot to, but they are both kind of mystery novels. And by mystery novels, I really just mean a good book. All good books are mysteries. Donna Tartt talks about this in an interview. In it, she references, not Scorsese, but Hitchcock. It's just about suspense. Storytelling is about suspense, and not just for thrillers. Neither of these books are thrillers, but they both act as mysteries because the ending is revealed first, and then you spend the entirety of the book catching up to the end. That mystery and the rules of civility is accomplished with the prologue. Listen, I'm always saying it, but an effective prologue is really the best way to hook readers, like in The Secret History. I say that every time. My hot take is that I think that Anna Karenina should have had a spoiler where the ending is revealed, a prologue where the ending is revealed first. Anna Karenina was spoiled for me before we read it, and before I read it. And I could not put it down. I couldn't put it down. I had to know how we got from where we are now to the ending. Tom Lake also does that, not through a prologue, but by the fact that it's a story about a movie star she clearly does not end up with, and you want to know why. And that propels you through the story in Tom Lake, and in Rules of Civility, propels you through the story because you want to know why. You want to know what happened to this man. It seems like he fell down on his luck, and he used to be this very wealthy man, is what the prologue tells you. Also, I loved all of the characters in Rules of Civility. Very compelling. Loved all of them. This is about, as the back says, 25-year-old Katie Content. And it's primarily about her relationship to one man, but multiple men. She's a whore. And her relationship to her best friend Eve. And apart from you knowing that Katie doesn't end up with Tinker, the novel is kind of plotless and enjoyably so. It's just the trials and tribulations of a young woman in New York in, I think, the 1930s. I also like this, 37, as I said before. I also don't mind this time period. Listen, I hate a World War I novel. I don't like a World War II novel. I just don't like war. But this is that nice period right before World War II. And I really didn't mind it. Also, what I said was that the story or aspects of it are necessitated by the time period, in this case the 30s, when women were treated like trash, per se, in a way. When women just didn't have many rights, or they didn't have the opportunity to have the same paths in lives as men. Oh, this is the book that made me pick up Walden. Pick it up off my bookshelf. I have not read it yet, but it mentions Walden. I don't know if it's because I'm emotionally volatile, or this book was really that moving, or if it was because it was midnight and I was tired and hungry, but this book really made me cry. Similar theme to Tom Lake in looking back on your life and seeing how things unfolded, but the ending of Rules of Civility is less certain and affirming than Tom Lake. It reminded me a lot of the ending of Call Me By Your Name, kinda. Not really. These books exist on a spectrum of reflecting back on the paths we could have taken in life, and at one point we're on those paths. But it very, very sad. And not in a beat you upside the head way. Rarely are books that try and be extremely sad are extremely sad. Sometimes they're sad. As we will soon see. Skip to Lily King's The English Teacher if you want to know what I mean. Ending got me. There are plot twists in this book. It's wonderful. Since I read a blurb for Tom Lake, let's read a blurb for Amor, Towles, then look at my notes app, see what I had to say. No. Terrible. Here's an example of a terrible blurb from the New York Times Book Review. Quote, with this snappy period piece, Towles resurrects the cinematic black and white Manhattan of the Golden Age. What a terrible review of this book. It's not a period piece, it's about people. Ultimately, it's about people. The time period is really irrelevant to the story. It's all but irrelevant. In a way, it's not actually irrelevant, but the heart of this story lies at the paths we take in life and looking back on those paths and regretting or not regretting it. A terrible review. Who wants to read a snappy period piece about the cinematic black and white Manhattan golden age? Not me. This was his debut novel. That's crazy. What a wonderful man. It's also crazy that even after reading this and loving it, and it being his debut novel, I think I would hate his other novels. They're all trash. Not the books themselves, but the marketing, I hate all of them. Let's look at my notes app and see what I had to say about this book. They're also, in addition to these books having really good plot twists, makes you consider what is right, what is wrong. Scratch that. They're quotable, for whatever that's worth. Some books are not quotable, but they're very, very good, which is weird. What makes me think of that is Daphne du Maurier, who I'm reading right now. Did I say that I listened to this on audiobook as a last-ditch effort? After I'd gotten like 20, 10, 30, whatever % in, I was going to switch to just reading it, but I was attached to the narrator. I thought it was a nice narrator. So my quotes for this book are in terms of percentage, not page number. I don't really have many notes on this. Like I said, when a book is great, I don't have critiques. I just have a few good quotes sometimes in this is wonderful. One of my bullet points is TBH, I just hate the cover designs. Rules of Civility is a great title. And it is a great title, but for me, the title kind of sinks into the dust and boredom of the rest of the marketing, and it's like, Rules of Civility. Which, that's kind of what it is. It's a book George Washington wrote. Anyway, let's go through some of the quotes. Chapter 3, quote, which is just to say, be careful when choosing what you're proud of because the world has every intention of using it against you. At 36%, I did not write down the quote. All I wrote down was King Kong boobs. Quote, I don't know where this was. They call them dreams for a reason, right? Chapter 17, quote, how is Mrs. Ross bearing up? She was like someone in mourning. I don't know. I didn't write down the rest of the quote. What can you do? I figured I would go back in and annotate the book or just reread it. I also recommended this to a friend and she read it in 2 days and then gave it to her mom to read. It is really, really that good. It's just good storytelling. Books today, they don't make them like they used to. I swear I can't find a good, well-written story anywhere. This is at 68%. It says, and it's missing the middle half of the quote, but it says, quote, when he saw me, his charms collapsed, ... nature's way of letting you see someone a little more clearly for what they are. At 70%, quote, be not forward but friendly and courteous. That's you in spades. When I got to that, I said, that's a mic drop. Probably heavily a mic drop because I relate to it a lot. I hate a person who's friendly and will never be forward with you, is always lying, deceiving, whatever, but is always nice to your face. Being forward is much kinder than being friendly. Write that down. That's one of the reasons a girl offs herself in 13 Reasons Why, which is one of the books we're talking about. Because someone was friendly and courteous but not forward with her. It's wonderful. What a great quote. Let this serve as a reminder to you to be honest and upfront with people, even if it, I don't know. I value honesty. I value honesty, a dying trait. 74%, I don't even have a quote. I just wrote good advice. 75%, quote, I guess there are 2 sides to every story, and as usual, they were both excuses. And finally, a quote that I didn't even put a page or percentage number, quote, right choices are the means by which life crystallizes loss. Amen. And that really sums up the thread between Tom Lake and the Rules of Civility and what I've been talking about, that these books are about taking a path in life and then mulling over how your life could have ended up, and that being very, very sad. I don't know. It's not necessarily sad. I mean, of course it regret. But it's not necessarily sad. I've said it, I don't know how much I'm going to cut, but it exists on a spectrum. But it's always sad, always sad. Even if you know that you've chosen the right path in life, it is still sad to consider the alternatives that you almost took, that you could have taken. I can't wait to reread the Rules of Civility. I say this in probably every other video, but the reason I'm running through books now is because I want to hit a certain age and then never read a new book again. Maybe one new book every other year, but I just want to be rereading books. So this is kind of my survey period of reading. I got to know what's good. I'm going to run out of Steam soon. Steam to discover new books. So I just kind of want to know what the rundown is. which books am I going to circle back to? This will be one of them. Tom Lake, maybe, maybe not. This will be one of them. Next book is the super popular book that had been on my TBR or whatever. I had owned it for so long and wanted to read it for so long that I had begun dreading it. That is The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. And because my dread was at a peak, I thought my expectations are lowest, I better go in for it. And so I did, and overall, it was really, really wonderful. This book is what I wanted Crying in H Mart to be by Michelle Zauner, and it serves as an example that fiction is more effective, moving, and it's crazy to say genuine or in earnest, even though I think Michelle Zauner was being in earnest, but this fiction feels all of those things more than Crying in H Mart does. And I'm not just pitting Asian women against each other, a Korean woman and a Chinese woman, even though Michelle Zauner, I think in the book, part of it is that she's American, that she's not, I don't know, we can't go into identity politics or whatever it's called. But these two books share a lot of similarities in that they're both premised on the mother dying and the daughter exploring herself and her culture, particularly food. Food is decently, actually, I was going to say not as featured in the Joy Luck Club, but that's actually a lie. It's probably more featured, and in a manner that's more compelling, featured in the Joy Luck Club than in Crying in H Mart. Crying in H Mart just, that's the hook, that it's about food. It's not really about food. It's just about your parent dying. I understand that it can feel, on the surface, cruel to call a story, a fiction story, more compelling and genuine, better than someone's actual experience with their dead mother. But fiction is made out of reality, per se. One of the videos that I recently made, it was the Ranking Classics. I read a quote from Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety. It wasn't even part of the book. It was just in an interview. He was like, it's pedestrian to nitpick what in a fiction book draws on life and what doesn't. And I think his answer was like, it all does and it all doesn't. And that's why fiction is real and not real. And that's why nonfiction is also fake. Anyway, that's all to say, bump Crying in H Mart. I think it's a bad book, but I thought the Joy Luck Club was wonderful and accomplishes what Crying in H Mart thought it was doing. Like I said, this is about a daughter whose mother dies and 3 other Chinese American daughters whose mothers moved from China to America. This book is divided into 3 parts, and it switches back and forth between the mother's perspectives and the daughter's perspectives. And while I think that that's a fun structure, it bordered on gimmick, and I think crossed over a little bit into gimmick because the stories are so interchangeable. I tried to keep track of, well, I actually did. I would flip back and keep track of whose parent was whose, because there are, well, 3 parents now because the mother has died, but 4 daughters. And so I'd flip back and forth and try and remember which daughter was which, but it actually turns out, with very few exceptions, those exceptions being in the end where a story is told from the mother's perspective that was previously told from the daughters, it ends up being the relationship between the daughter and mothers and across the daughters and across the mothers. Those lines actually end up being fairly irrelevant and gimmicky because of the similarities and lack of meaning that I found when trying to keep track of whose mother was whose or whatever. You can just read this book and be like, screw it, I don't need to know whose mother was whose. That was a major reason why this book wasn't completely compulsively readable for me, although I did really enjoy it, was because I would try and keep up with who was who. And the chapters, I mean, are fairly short. I think there are maybe 12 chapters, but with a book this short, that's like start, stop. And really, all of the daughters' stories and mothers, to an extent, I guess, they all have their separate ways of leaving China and getting to the US, but the daughters in particular are all fairly similar for the, I don't know, some are more successful than others. They all have their different habits, hobbies, jobs, whatever. One's a high paid something, lawyer maybe, I think a lawyer, and others are low paid somethings. The book is about the relationship between mothers and daughters, between 2 different cultures, between the mother's Chinese culture and the daughter's American culture. The daughters are American, between the mother's aspirations for their daughters and the daughter's own hopes and dreams. It is very moving, very sad, and despite me not loving the structure, I thought it was a really wonderful and readable book. Going back, I probably just would completely ignore the distinctions between the characters and read it as kind of a disjointed vignette-y recounting of memories, because the chapters act as short stories kind of in themselves. Let's get into my notes app, see what I said about this book. Crying in H Mart, my first note, crying in H Mart is just a shit Joy Luck Club. Amen. Great quotes. She is a wonderful writer. Let's just go in chronological order, or like notes app order. Page 28, quote, she finally explained that I was late blooming, like Einstein, who everyone thought was retarded until he discovered a bomb. I love the Chinese sayings. I think the Chinese are brilliant. There's a saying I think about a lot, and I can't share it. It's a secret. And I think that Amy Tan makes them up, that she's the author of these Chinese isms, that they're not just old retold wisdoms. I don't know. I googled one of them and it came up with Amy Tan. Oh, this is a mic drop. Page 42, quote, his gold is like yours, it is only 14 carats. To Chinese people, 14 carats isn't real gold. Feel my bracelets. They must be 24 carats pure inside and out. Page 51, quote, after a while I didn't think it was a terrible life. No, not really. After a while I hurt so much I didn't feel any difference. Page 64, quote, I did not lose myself all at once. I rubbed out my face over the years, washing away my pain. I put an asterisk by this quote, but I didn't write it down, which probably means that I liked it a lot, so I'll pull it up from the book. This is from page 83 to 84, and it says, quote, but now that I am old, moving every year closer to the end of my life, I also feel closer to the beginning, and I remember everything that happened that day because it has happened many times in my life. The same innocence, trust, and restlessness, the wonder, fear, and loneliness, how I lost myself. I remember all these things, and tonight, on the 15th day of the 8th moon, I also remember what I asked the moon lady so long ago. I wish to be found. A really, really great quote. That quote got me when I was first reading it. Page 96, quote, I have a lot of quotes. We're doing them all. Page 96, quote, I also found out why I should never reveal why to others. A little knowledge withheld is a great advantage. One should store for future use. That is the power of chess. It is a game of secrets in which one must show and never tell. That wisdom reminded me of in Crying in H Mart, when the mother tells her daughter, you must always reserve 10% of yourself for future use. Also, in the spirit of Sabrina Carpenter having her moment, a line from Tornado Warnings, a quote, it's just the lyric, it's, I wish I had kept some of my feelings in the basement so I still had some left. It's a very bleak sentiment that you can't and shouldn't, you definitely can, that you shouldn't give yourself completely to anyone. Your lover, your family, your friends, to nobody. Nobody should ever have 100% of you. And it's a bleak sentiment. Why do I keep saying it like that? Sentiment that I really resound with. Page 127, quote, this was such a big leap in logic between what I said and what he said that I thought we were like two people standing apart on separate mountain peaks, leaning forward to throw stones at one another, unaware of the dangerous chasm that separated us. Page 128, quote, when something that violent hits you, you can't help but lose your balance and fall, and after you pick yourself up, you realize you can't trust anybody to save you, not your husband, not your mother, not God. So what can you do to stop yourself from tilting and falling all over again? There's a kid's book about, I think, how children die. It's called The 26 Malignant Gates on page 131, and it reminded me of an Edward Gorey book. We're going to have to skip some of the quotes because I have so many. Oh, Jing Mei's second story with the piano and mother. Very sad. Oh, this is a critique of the audiobook, but in the Lena St. Clair Rice husband chapter, the narrator uses a Chinese accent for the Irish-American dad. And I was like, there was no quality control in anything. What's happening? The narrator had previously used a very American accent for the dad, but then switched to a Chinese. The Joy Luck Club reminds me of the sad acceptance of life as considered in Olive Kittredge, an interpreter of maladies. Oh, one of the stories prominently features Lena. No, I mean, it's about Lena and her husband Harold, but it's about money and how couples split up money. And I was wondering, for as long as I've lived, I don't know how couples split up money. I still don't get it. I don't know. That particular story was about how they keep count, that they're always keeping track, that it's whatever. Anyway, I don't remember if there's a quote that particularly ties to this, but if you find yourself in a relationship keeping score, something's wrong. Page 244, quote, "Now you see," said the turtle, drifting back into the pond, "why it is useless to cry. Your tears do not wash away your sorrows, they feed someone else's joy. And that is why you must learn to swallow your own tears." Page 241, quote, "She cried, 'No choice, no choice. She doesn't know. If she doesn't speak, she is making a choice. If she doesn't try, she can lose her chance forever.'" Oh, a critique I had of this book is that I was confused about Ying Ying St. Clair's development. After her, I think it's a stillborn birth, and even before that, she's very melancholy and ethereal, very like a, not ghost per se, but a, not wreath, what are they called? Like a wraith, maybe? I don't know, but she's just kind of subdued, broody, detached from reality a bit, and then after her stillborn child, she kind of goes completely off her rocker. I said, quote, me quoting myself, I'll just read you the bullet point. It says, I said, "I'm kind of confused about how active Ying Ying is in Lena's husband chapter. It doesn't fit the crazy, depressed, dreamy character from the chapter before that." And I thought that was a bit of a plot hole. I don't understand how she goes from such a distinct character to one that is so different, but similar to the other mothers. And that was part of why I was like, okay, so if the characters aren't even consistent with themselves, then the distinction between them is irrelevant. Page 243, quote, "But I must warn you, if you cry, your life will always be sad." We'll do one more quote and then move on. This is on page 272, quote, "I know how it is to live your life like a dream, to listen and watch, to wake up and try to understand what has already happened. You do not need a psychiatrist to do this. A psychiatrist does not want you to wake up. He tells you to dream some more, to find the pond and pour more tears into it. And really, he is just another bird drinking from your misery." Amen. The last book that I thought was truly outstanding was a complete shock. I started this for a video, and I thought it would be silly. I thought it would be, I don't know, just bad and offensive because of its existence as a YA book that embraces suicide as a topic of conversation. I thought 13 Reasons Why, with this cover in addition, could not possibly be a good book, and I was proved completely wrong. This is a wonderful book, great storytelling. For me, I had already seen the Netflix show, which after the first season is atrocious. So reading the book, there was no mystery. I think, I didn't compare, I didn't check, but it sounds like a lot of the audio or dialogue, whatever, monologue. Hannah's tapes are taken in the TV show, are taken directly from the book. But what I was saying is that there was no really mystery for me. I watched this fairly recently, like when it came out. So it had been a minute, but I understood the premise and the people. And really all that left was sadness for me. Was sadness. That I was very sad reading this book. And that's why I axed the video. Did I say I was reading this for a video? Axed it. That video is not making it out. But without the mystery of what happens and why she kills herself, which the TV show does sensationalize, 2 major points. She doesn't cut herself when she dies. She takes sleeping pills, and she's not raped in the book like she is in the TV show, I think. I thought it was kind of distasteful to sensationalize the manner of her death and what leads to it, because it takes away from the veracity of her reasons in the book to begin with. It's like, oh no, her reasons weren't good enough. She just did sleeping pills. Or, oh no, getting fingered by some random guy when you don't want to isn't a good enough reason to kill yourself. Better to be raped completely.
I know you hate an interlude, but I don't think I explain it well enough, and sometimes I'm wary of letting my fans interpret what I say, sometimes go for it. But in this case, the reason it's sorry about the sound, but the reason it's distasteful to sensationalize her manner of death, to show that she was more serious, that it wasn't half thought out, that she like really wanted it, and to say that she was raped instead of fingered, is because it misses the point completely. One, it's just sensationalizing for the sake of trauma pandering for people, which works, but also two, it conflicts with the story, because the point of the story is not that these are good reasons to off yourself. The TV show is like, oh yeah, but that wasn't really a good enough reason. It's like you're missing the whole point. The point of the book is that small things can have such an impact, and do have such an impact on the way people feel. Okay.
And so I thought that was distasteful. Not that that's what this review is about. What is anything about? What is this video about? It can be about anything, but that's apart from the book. 13 Reasons Why I thought it would be so bad is because it's like, well, what's the point? To like trauma bait about suicide, to encourage people per se, to glamorize it. Like, what's the point? I don't understand it. But as I was reading it, I realized that 13 Reasons Why is not a testament to the validity of suicide, but rather a testament to the fact that emotions do not exist on a spectrum of validity. That emotions are valid by virtue of being felt and nothing else. What they lead to, how they make you act, you can categorize as irrational, whatever, not logical, but the emotions themselves are there and logical for merely existing. And it was really moving. People don't act like emotions are real. They act like that if you act on your emotions, those actions are irrational, and in that kind of one-handed sweep away, they discredit your own emotions, and that's what makes people really, really frustrated. This book is a good reminder to be kind to people, that little things really do make a difference to people, not just people who want to off themselves. Blown away. Great storytelling, writing great, didn't cringe at all. Really, really impressed. And also the method of storytelling, the tapes, is very creative. I read on the flap that the author, I think, thought of it when he was in a museum and was listening to the docent, per se, or whatever they're called, just to a woman talking about the paintings as he walked around the museum listening to it. You know, like the little audio things they give you at museums. And I thought that was really cool. Oh, also, just in case I wasn't clear, not only do I think this is a really great book, I think that you should read it. It's a great book for kids to realize that other kids have emotions too, but also for adults to realize a lot of things, that other people have emotions which even adults forget, but also that kids have emotions, that they're real, that they feel them as real regardless of your opinion of them. Let's see what I said in my notes app. Oh, I said the first chapter is great. For me, the mystery was removed because I'd already seen the TV show and it is very, very similar. But I said first chapter is good, and then I compared it to We Have Always Lived in the Castle because it kind of drops you in the middle and you're like, what went wrong? What happened? I don't often talk about the effect books have had on culture at large, per se, or just the author's intent in writing the book. I think that that's irrelevant, that the history and whatever surrounding a book is irrelevant. A book should be a good book regardless of the time you read it. What I'm trying to say is that good art stands on its own. 13 Reasons Why stands on its own, but is all the more impressive because I think it might have played, I didn't do much research, but might have played a really big role in suicide awareness, or just in youth awareness, mental, whatever, just that kids have feelings that are not BS. Oh, I wrote, one of my bullet points was 13 whole ass people I have to keep track of feels like a Tolstoy novel. Listen, I'm going to be self-aggrandizing for a second and think that my word has absolutely any sway with people, but if you're looking for someone to tell you not to, my vote is don't. My vote is don't. Let's do some quotes. Page 39, quote, "There is just something about having everyone agree on something about you that opens a cage of butterflies in your stomach." Page 53, quote, "But the point is, when you hold people up for ridicule, you have to take responsibility when other people act on it." Oh, here's the thread that I mentioned when we were talking about rules of civility. Page 95, quote, "Let me be very clear, I do not hate you, Courtney. In fact, I don't even dislike you. But for a time, I thought you and I were becoming friends. It turns out you were just grooming me to be another tally mark under people who think Courtney Crimson is a really neat girl. Another guaranteed vote for most liked in the senior yearbook. And once you did it to me and I realized it, I watched you do it to others." Being friendly to someone is not being kind to someone. There's a difference that people at large do not understand or don't, I don't know. It's crazy to me. It is crazy to me. Blows my mind. Page 135, quote, "So why would I trust someone he hangs out with? Why? Because that's exactly what I wanted for me. I wanted people to trust me despite anything they'd heard, and more than that, I wanted them to know me. Not the stuff they thought they knew about me. No, the real me. I wanted them to get past the rumors, to see beyond the relationships I once had, or maybe still had, but that they didn't agree with. And if I wanted people to treat me that way, then I had to do the same for them, right?" We'll end on a quote, as we seem to always be doing. This is on page 156, and it's a nice summary of the thesis of the book, per se. Summary of the thesis. It's just a thesis, which is a summary, per se, of the book. Page 156, quote, "I guess that's the point of it all. No one knows for certain how much impact they have on the lives of other people. Oftentimes we have no clue, yet we push it just the same.